Imagine you're walking into a high-stakes meeting,
Mm,
but instead of, running through the agenda in your head, you're literally scanning the room like a tactical operative.
right, just looking for the exits.
Exactly. You're calculating the exact distance to the door. You're checking to see if the window is painted shut, and you are just quietly praying. You don't suddenly start sweating through your clothes while the CEO is talking.
Mm-hmm.
Or, like, picture sitting at your kitchen table at 10 o'clock at night, completely redoing a report you wrote at 2 in the afternoon because the brain fog was so thick earlier that the words they simply wouldn't format correctly. It's this completely invisible, exhausting calculus.
It really is. And if you have ever found yourself strategically positioning your chair near an air conditioning vent or, using just sheer willpower to mask how deeply fatigued you really are, the stack of sources we're analyzing today is going to validate that experience completely.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, we are looking at medical guidance from the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, government frameworks from the U.S. Department of Labor and the UK's gov.uk, alongside like a ton of corporate HR manuals.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission today is highly specific and honestly incredibly practical. We are uncovering the recommended workplace adjustments for managing severe hot flushes and night sweats.
Hmm.
So whether you're prepping for a management role, advocating for your own needs, or just, looking out for a colleague, these documents make a compelling case. Providing small, low-cost structural adjustments is not about handing out special treatment.
Right, not at all.
Yeah, they're essential, pragmatic tools designed to keep brilliant, experienced professionals in the workforce. But I guess before we get to the actual solutions, we have to understand the biological mechanisms we're actually adjusting for.
Definitely. You really need that foundation.
Right. And the data shows 20 to 25% of women experience troublesome hot flushes. And the trigger isn't just random, which I found fascinating. Like, one study of nearly 900 women highlighted that 71% reported hot or unventilated workspaces were direct triggers. 71%.
Which is huge. But when we look at the underlying biology, that statistic makes perfect sense. A hot flush isn't just, feeling a little warm. It's a systemic physiological event.
Okay, so what is actually happening in the body?
Well, during menopause, fluctuating estrogen levels essentially scramble the hypothalamus.
It's like the brain's internal thermostat, right?
Exactly. It gets a false reading, so it's suddenly convinced the body is overheating. And in response, it triggers massive vasodilation.
Vasodilation, that's the widening of the blood vessels.
Yeah, the vessels near the skin widen to dump heat, and it activates the sweat glands to cool the body down. So if a worker is sitting in an unventilated, like 80-degree office, the baseline temperature is already elevated.
Oh, I see. So the margin for error is just razor thin at that point.
Precisely. The moment that internal false alarm trips, the environmental heat compounds the physiological response. It makes the flush significantly more severe and way harder to recover from.
Wow. Okay, so it makes complete biological sense that formal meetings are also cited by, I think it was 63% of women as a major trigger.
Yeah, that's the psychological component.
Right, because high visibility work requires intense attention, which naturally elevates your cortisol and adrenaline. If your nervous system is already on edge, that stress acts as the catalyst for the hypothalamus to just throw that false overheating alarm.
The occupational health data really emphasizes that intersection of stress and biology. And, we see an even more extreme version of this compounding effect when the sources address shift workers.
Oh, shifts workers. Yeah, that was wild.
Yeah, it's intense. Employees doing night shifts are fighting their own circadian rhythms, the natural 24-hour sleep-wake cycle.
Mm-hmm.
When you disrupt that rhythm by staying awake under artificial light, it alters your melatonin production, which in turn actually disrupts the secretion patterns of estrogen and progesterone.
Wait, really? Just being awake at night changes your estrogen?
It does. The medical guidance indicates the circadian disruption can severely exacerbate menopausal symptoms. And prolonged shift work is even linked in some epidemiological studies to an earlier onset of menopause altogether.
That is just, here's what it gets really interesting to me, because it sounds like we are asking people to run a high-stakes corporate marathon, sometimes in the middle of the night,
Yeah.
while their internal thermostat is wildly malfunctioning. I mean, it's like running a marathon in a snowsuit on 3 hours of sleep, and then management is wondering why their performance might occasionally dip. It just seems like historically the expectation was simply to tough it out in silence. Is that what the sources suggest?
Sadly, yes. The documents describe the current reality for many as, quote, quietly exhausting. The research indicates that 1 in 4 menopausal women say they do not get the support they need from their manager.
1 in 4. That's awful.
And it's driven by fear of stigma, taboo, or, being perceived as aging out of their prime. It prevents the majority from disclosing these health challenges.
So they just hide it.
Exactly. They are engaging in massive amounts of compensatory behavior, like working much longer hours to make up for brain fog or just avoiding presentations altogether just to hide the struggle.
Which brings us to the actual physical adjustments recommended to combat this. Because if unventilated spaces and heat are the primary environmental triggers, the occupational health guidance is incredibly tactical about immediate alterations.
They are very specific.
Yeah, they highlight giving employees access to adjustable thermostats, providing desk fans, and physically moving workstations away from heat sources like radiators or, placing them near openable windows.
And the guidance also zeroes in on a really specific friction point, which is dress codes.
Oh, yes. The uniforms.
Right. If the hypothalamus is desperately trying to dump heat, forcing an employee to wear a heavy synthetic uniform is entirely counterproductive. Synthetic materials like polyester or nylon, they just trap heat and moisture right against the skin.
It's like wearing a plastic bag.
Exactly. So the corporate HR manuals strongly advise relaxing formal uniform requirements. This means explicitly removing mandates for tights or neckties and providing uniform options made from breathable, natural fibers.
Like cotton or bamboo.
Yes. And permitting layered clothing so an employee can discreetly remove a layer when that internal alarm trips.
They also detailed the necessity of private spaces, right? Like quiet rooms where someone can just step away for a few minutes to ride out a severe flush.
Along with access to washrooms and changing facilities.
Yeah, and extra uniforms so they aren't forced to sit in damp clothing for the rest of their shift.
Yeah.
But I have to challenge this slightly.
Okay, go for it.
Looking at this list, a desk fan, sitting near a window, a cotton shirt, it feels a little bit superficial. Like, does giving someone a $20 desk fan actually solve a systemic biological issue? Or is it just corporate window dressing to make the company look supportive?
What's fascinating here is the interplay between the physical and the psychological.
Okay.
The fan itself is just moving air, yes,
Yeah.
but it is providing a critical psychological safety net. We established that anxiety and stress, like the pressure of a formal meeting, are primary triggers for hot flushes, right?
Right.
So if an employee is sitting in a boardroom, terrified of having a visible flush and knowing they have absolutely no way to cool down, that anticipatory anxiety spikes their adrenaline, which ironically triggers the exact flush they were fearing.
So the self-fulfilling biological prophecy.
Precisely. By providing a fan or allowing them to sit near the door, the employer is returning a sense of control to the individual.
Oh, I see.
Knowing you have an escape route or a way to physically mitigate the heat significantly lowers the baseline anxiety. That reduction in stress often reduces the actual frequency and severity of the physiological symptoms. The adjustment literally mitigates the trigger itself.
Wow. Okay, that reframes the desk fan entirely. It's an anxiety reduction tool just as much as a cooling device.
Exactly.
Now, those adjustments tackle the spatial and environmental challenges of hot flushes. But night sweats require a completely different approach because we're shifting from altering physical space to altering structural time.
Yes.
And that's because the core side effect of night sweats is sleep deprivation.
The medical literature in our stack makes a very clear distinction here. A night sweat isn't just waking up a little warm, it is waking up completely drenched.
Right.
It requires a change of clothes and sometimes even changing the bed linens. This shatters the sleep architecture. It pulls the brain completely out of deep restorative REM sleep.
And if that happens every night?
Right? Over weeks or months, this leads to chronic sleep deprivation, which translates in the workplace to severe fatigue, irritability, and a very real cognitive symptom commonly called brain fog.
And the brain fog aspect is heavily emphasized in the HR manuals regarding workflow. Because trying to execute complex analytical work when you haven't completed a full sleep cycle in 3 days, I mean, it's like trying to run heavy software on 1% battery.
That's a great way to put it.
You wouldn't force a massive system update, right? Then you'd plug the device in, let it rest, and maybe just run some low-power background diagnostics. You have to manage the load based on the available power.
And the concept of task shifting reflects that exact logic.
Task shifting, right?
Yeah. The HR guidelines advocate allowing employees to reorganize their workflow based on their cognitive capacity on any given day.
So how does that look in practice?
Well, if an employee is suffering from acute sleep deprivation, task shifting allows them to save routine, low-stakes administrative work like basic data entry or filing for those heavy brain fog days,
Mhm.
and they can preserve their complex, high-stakes tasks for the days when their cognitive focus is sharper. But, it requires managers to actually trust their employees to manage their own productivity pipeline.
Which is key. And alongside task shifting, the sources consistently bring up flexible hours. Like if a worker has been awake since 3 in the morning, forcing a rigid 8 o'clock start time basically guarantees poor work and heightened stress.
Absolutely.
Allowing them to recover and start their day at 10 o'clock preserves the quality of their output. We also see strong recommendations for location flexibility, right? Like ad hoc hybrid working for days when the physical exhaustion just makes the commute impossible.
Yeah, and meetings also require structural adjustments regarding time. The guidance advises normalizing short, unscheduled breaks during long
That
sessions.
makes so much sense.
Just having a simple policy stating that anyone can step out for 5 minutes without needing to offer a grand explanation. It prevents employees from feeling physically trapped, which, again, lowers that baseline anxiety that triggers the symptoms.
All right, back to the psychological safety net. But practically speaking, though, the communication barrier here seems immense.
Wow, it's a huge hurdle.
Because if an employee approaches their manager to ask for a later start time or permission to avoid complex tasks for the day, there's a very real fear that they sound like they're just asking for a massive favor or simply trying to get out of doing their job. How do they actually ask?
So, the strategic frameworks provided by the labor departments address this communication hurdle head on. The key is to frame these adjustments not as personal favors, but as performance enablers. You link the biological symptom directly to the professional output.
So instead of focusing on the discomfort, you focus on the deliverable.
Exactly the strategy. Instead of an employee saying, I am exhausted and can't focus, the recommendation is to say, severe sleep disruption is currently affecting my morning concentration. Adjusting my start time to 10 o'clock will allow me to maintain the high quality of my analytical work.
Oh, that's smart.
Right. The language centers entirely on preserving value to the organization. It completely shifts the request from a plea for sympathy to a strategic business negotiation.
Which brings us to the ultimate leverage point, honestly. Why employers are obligated to participate in this negotiation at all. We've established the biological needs and the practical solutions.
Yeah.
But the government frameworks from both the UK and the US transition this conversation from personal health into the realm of occupational health.
Yeah.
And critically, legal duty.
Yes.
Like if an employer views a desk fan or a flexible schedule as just some frivolous perk, they are stepping into a legal minefield.
The legal landscape is evolving so rapidly to address this. Let's examine the UK framework first. Menopause itself is not listed as a distinct protected characteristic under the UK's Equality Act 2010.
Okay.
However, the legal precedents established in recent tribunals show that failing to provide reasonable adjustments can lead to successful claims of age, sex, or disability discrimination.
Disability discrimination. Because of menopause.
Yes. The mechanism is clear. If menopausal symptoms have a substantial and long-term adverse effect on a person's ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities, those symptoms meet the legal definition of a disability under the Act.
Wow. And the United States framework utilizes a similar mechanism through the ADA, right? The Americans with Disabilities Act.
Correct.
While there's no specific menopause act, the ADA protects workers if their symptoms are severe enough to be classified as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities.
And sleeping and concentrating are explicitly recognized as major life activities.
Right.
So if night sweats and brain fog substantially limit those functions, the employer is federally mandated to engage in an interactive process to find reasonable accommodations. Furthermore, the sources bring in the PMP Act.
The PMP Act. Wait, the Providing Urgent Maternal Protections for Nursing Mothers Act. That seems like an odd inclusion. That's specifically for nursing mothers, so how does that provide a framework for menopausal workers?
It acts as a really powerful legislative precedent. The PUMP Act forced employers to recognize that temporary, transient biological states like lactation require structural workplace adjustments, specifically private spaces and flexible break times. It established the principle that the workplace must adapt to the biological realities of its workforce rather than forcing the workforce to suppress their biology.
That is a massive shift in perspective.
It really is. And when you combine that precedent with OSHA standards, which explicitly require employers to provide potable drinking water, toilet facilities, and reasonable opportunities to use them,
Yeah.
you have a robust federal mandate for basic human needs at work.
And the UK's Health and Safety at Work Act goes even further, right, with the requirement for formal risk assessment.
Yes, exactly.
Employers can't just sit around and wait for an employee to ask for help. They have a proactive legal duty to evaluate the workplace. And the new guidance states these assessments must specifically include menopause.
Hmm.
They have to evaluate physical risks, like poor ventilation or windows that won't open, and psychosocial risks, like extreme workplace stress, exacerbating those vasomotor symptoms.
And that proactive duty extends deep into HR policy, too, specifically regarding sickness absence, because historically this has been a massive cultural failing.
Oh, absolutely.
If an employee took a day off due to severe hot flushes or insomnia, it was just logged into her general sick leave quota. Many corporate attendance policies utilize mechanisms like the Bradford factor, which mathematically penalizes frequent short-term absences.
Right, and hitting a specific numerical trigger point automatically launches disciplinary action or like performance capability reviews.
Exactly.
Penalizing someone with a formal performance review for an ongoing multi-year biological transition is, I mean, it's not just unfair, it actively pushes them out the door.
Precisely. So the structural fix outlined in the HR manuals is to completely decouple these events. HR must update their tracking software to record menopause-related absences as an entirely separate category from general sick leave.
So the algorithm doesn't just automatically trigger those punitive actions.
Right. By separating them, you protect the employee from being disciplined for unavoidable biological symptoms.
And the sources also emphasize the cultural implementation of these policies through menopause champions, which I thought was a great concept, because having a written policy is absolutely useless if the workplace culture is too toxic to actually use it.
So true.
A menopause champion acts as a knowledgeable, confidential first point of contact, someone completely outside the employee's direct chain of command who can help navigate the adjustments. Coupled with mandatory training for line managers to conduct zero-tolerance anti-discrimination conversations, it really attacks the taboo from both the grassroots and the leadership levels.
And it has to, because if an employer chooses to ignore the biology, the physical environment, and the legal frameworks, the economic fallout is catastrophic.
It really is.
The data across our sources estimates that 1 million women in the UK alone have left their jobs entirely due to menopausal symptoms.
1 million professionals walking out the door. Just think about that. These are individuals in their late 40s and 50s operating at the absolute peak of their careers. They hold decades of institutional knowledge, industry relationships, and leadership experience. When an employer refuses to modify a synthetic uniform or denies a later start time after a sleepless night, they aren't just losing a worker. They are actively draining their own talent pool.
Which is terrible for business.
Exactly. Providing a $20 fan to retain a senior executive is perhaps the highest return on investment an HR department can possibly make.
It frames workplace adjustments not as some annoying administrative burden, but as a critical business imperative for talent retention.
Wow. We have covered incredible ground today.
We really have.
We started with the sheer biological reality, right? How the hypothalamus misfires, triggering severe hot flushes, and how environmental heat and psychological stress compound the issue. Then we explored the immediate physical fixes. Desk fans, open windows, and breathable natural fibers that give employees psychological control and reduce anxiety. We transitioned into time management, looking at how night sweats destroy sleep architecture, necessitating flexible hours, remote work, and task shifting to preserve cognitive output.
Yeah.
And finally, we examined the legal guardrails from the UK Equality Act to the US ADA that transition these accommodations from polite requests to fundamental occupational rights, requiring separate absence logging and proactive risk assessments.
So for anyone listening who is navigating this biological transition themselves or managing a team where these issues are silently playing out, you now have the specific operational language and the legal precedent to negotiate meaningful structural support.
Yes, definitely.
But there's a broader implication woven through all these government and corporate frameworks.
Okay. What's the final takeaway?
Well, the sources focus extensively on adjusting the traditional workplace to accommodate menopause. They treat the symptoms as a deviation from the norm. But If 50% of the global population will eventually go through this transition, why do we still view the rigid, 9 to 5, heavily suited, 72-degree office as the undisputed baseline?
That is a great question.
Right. Perhaps the future of work shouldn't be about retrofitting special accommodations for fundamental human biology. Perhaps we should be designing a biologically responsive workplace from the ground up, where fluid environments, flexible schedules, and breathable attire are simply the default operating system for everyone.
A workplace actually built for the humans working inside it. So the next time you walk into that high-stakes board meeting, you won't have to scan the room for the exits or the air vents, because the room will have been built with your reality in mind. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.